Welcome back to A Fresh Story, the podcast where we have conversations about brave decisions to start over again. I'm Jenny.
And I'm Olivia, and we're so glad you're here today. Hello, sister. How are you?
I'm okay. I've been thinking about something a lot recently.
Is it Joey Fatone?
No, it's about Taylor Swift.
You gotta listen to the other episodes.
It's about Taylor Swift.
Oh,
and
Taylor.
I'm curious how this whole thing with Travis Kelce goes, but I think it's really interesting that everybody's so sure that they're the real thing. It's been 5 weeks of them dating.
Mm-hmm.
They're still in limerence. You know what I mean? It's so fresh.
Yeah, I think a lot of
take.
I think a lot of it's orchestra. I mean, I
agree with you on that, but I'm saying I think the fact that everybody's they're so real, they're in love.
No.
I just want that. It's
no.
We all want the first 5 weeks of a relationship through a media filter.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but
this might be too controversial for the podcast.
Sorry, guys. Look, I'm all for love, and I think whatever about Taylor, but I think that
we think she's one of the most brilliant marketing minds of our generation.
She's a brilliant marketing mind. I think she's a brilliant marketing mind.
Yeah.
And I think that I think maybe we have a little bit of a different perspective because we have a publicist. And so people don't realize a lot of things are narratives, right? And they're there's a reason for things. So I don't know. This is not related to this episode at all. But
no, sorry.
We just felt we needed to get it off our chest, I guess.
Did all day.
Okay. I hear you. So, in the middle of the night last night, I was woken by one of my children who came into my room to tell me he had to poop. It was not the young one, I will say that. And so,
just my
kids are very connected to me, which I love.
Yes.
But sometimes I'm how are they going to grow up and go to college? Or will I have to go with them?
He'll shoot you a text about it.
Yeah, in the middle of the night. So this kind of relates to the fact that we talked to Amanda Montei. Amanda and I are in similar, I think we're in the same Facebook group for moms who write. Amanda had a book that just came out in 2023 called Touched Out. Yes. And it really is her perspective on being a mother in this world, bodily autonomy, agency, and what happens when we are literally touched out by our children. I definitely experienced this with my own kids. We had kind of a long journey to sleep, and they shared they co-slept with me during my divorce and after the divorce. And Weston co-slept with me for a long time, but Wyatt was not as much in the beginning. And actually, this is really common for single moms, is that they do co-sleep with older kids too. And I think I co-slept with them. I mean, I know I co-slept with them during the divorce as a protective measure for my physical and mental body.
And you feel, and I'm not putting this on anyone, but you feel that protective measure, you want to protect your kids, you want to be close to them.
100%. It's just it's a primal instinct.
Yeah, exactly.
But then we went through the pandemic together and we shared a king size bed, and it was a lot of touching time all the time. And so I ended up having to get Mahaley, who's a dear friend, and she was at the time was a sleep consultant and trainer, and she helped me. But I really, and you say this all the time, I never thought that they would sleep in their own beds.
You were very this is it. It's just going to destroy me. They're never going to sleep in their own beds. You weren't getting sleep. They probably weren't getting the sleep they needed.
No.
And nobody was really getting the sleep, and you were very sure that it was never going to change.
No.
You were
so
very much in that room of your life at that moment.
Yeah, and it was I didn't even watch TV at the time because it was I'd just have to sit there in a dark room with them. Basically, it was a lot.
Sounds fun.
Horrible. So we talked to Amanda about her book, and it was a very interesting conversation. So
yes.
Please enjoy this episode with Amanda. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to A Fresh Story so that we can keep telling fresh start stories. Amanda Montei is the author of Touched Out, Motherhood, Misogyny, Consent, and Control, which I am in a Facebook group with Amanda. And when she mentioned a long time ago that you were writing this book, I think in the Facebook group, everybody was like, yes, please. We all need to read this book. And so I was very, very honored to get an early edition of it. It is fantastic. And it really plays into so much of what we don't talk about with womanhood and motherhood and sex and joy and pleasure. So Amanda, I'm thrilled to have you here today. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. You know, the world is hard right now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation. Yeah, it's been busy sort of getting out there and promoting the book. But I'm excited to chat with you both.
Wonderful. Well, that's perfect. Why don't you take us back to the beginning of your Fresh Start story?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say getting sober and finishing this book has been like a total reboot in my life. You know, I was working on this book. I started it really when my first child was born, which was 8 years ago. And I was an academic at the time, finishing my PhD. And I really wanted to write something that was kind of an antidote to the sort of like disembodied academic writing that I had been doing. I was working on a dissertation with like a new baby and also working at a daycare, which I write about a little bit in the book. And so I really wanted this book to be full of subjectivity because the writing that I was doing at the time was not. It was like very, very, you know, objective in air quotes. So that's really how this book came about. But I think working through what was coming up in my body as a new parent on the page just brought up so much. And I was really finishing this book during the pandemic. So it was like this incredible confluence of like ideas and reality in my home, outside of the home. And just, yeah, it was like such a reckoning and such a kind of like exorcism almost of like my early life as a girl and a woman.
Yeah.
And then toward the end of finishing this book, I got sober and a bunch of new stuff came up. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. And then taking the book out into the world, you know, has been really interesting on the heels of kind of the isolation of motherhood.
Yeah.
It's very stark. I wonder too, and we can get into all of it, but the taking the book out into the world, you know, Olivia and I are so conscious that what we do is not always the most palatable for people. And I think the topics that you're talking about I think that there's a lot of people that are like, this is incredibly true. Most people, I think, experience it. And I think there's a lot of people that want to deny that it's incredibly true and incredibly real. And I wonder how that experience has been for you of sort of that intersection.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me as a writer, it's really important to write the things that are unpalatable or maybe unsaid.
Yeah.
Because for me, you know, it's about writing the truth. You know, I would never want to cover over, you know, the hard parts of growing up as a girl or being a woman or being a mom. So that was sort of like always just a given for me in my writing. Like if I was going to write about this, I wanted it to be true. Taking it out into the world, I mean, for the most part, like I've just received so many notes from women who have read the book and have felt like it gave them some language or some connections that they kind of knew were there. Like we all know that, you know, misogyny affects how we grow up if we're socialized as girls. We all know that it kind of influences the shape of motherhood, but kind of connecting those parts can be confusing. You know, it was confusing for me, which is why I wanted to write the book. So for the most part, it's been that. And then, of course, there's been like an extreme alt-right contingent that is very afraid.
Yeah,
you know,
that's what I was talking about.
Yeah. That's like really scared of women speaking honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially I'm just reading the back of your book. And I mean, like I said, I love this book, but you talk a lot about the connection between the Me Too movement and women's bodies and motherhood. And I do feel like there was an element of the Me Too movement that mothers were left out of, right? Because it was like, we never talk about sexual assault and motherhood together in that way. So where did those initial ideas for kind of that connection first come to be?
Yeah. I mean, I think they first came to be because I was a new mom watching Me Too in my little apartment with my daughter, feeling like my life as an academic, as a writer, was slipping away from me. And I was becoming this sort of like stock image of a mom, even though I was like a staunch feminist and I had studied all of this stuff, you know, so-called women's work, like invisible labor, you know, and I thought I was going to do it differently and correctly. You know, so I was like going through all that, and then Me Too was happening. And yeah, I think I felt like left out a bit, but I don't know that it was like, you know, so I wouldn't say that it was like the movement's fault per se.
Right.
I'm always like, you know, hesitant to say like it's a failure of feminism. I think it was just that I was so isolated and alienated, and I didn't have a community to connect with and sort of parse out like what was coming up in my body and how was that affecting me as a parent at the time, because we didn't really have that cultural conversation on the table yet.
No, we don't. And I think about that a lot, the physicality of parenthood. And like, I really think about that a lot, especially because I have two boys and they're now almost my height. And I'm like, well, I am still their mom, and yet they're like taller than me. And like, how physically, right? Like, how do we like manage this? And just about, like you said in the book so much, like the physical nature that we put into our children, right? And that they are part of us, and how that plays into sexuality and all of that. What was it like doing the research for this book and like talking to people, and like, did you find common themes like between the women that you talked to?
Yeah, well, I mean, this book is, you know, mostly rooted in my experience, and then in a lot of the research that I had been doing sort of before I became a mom, but sort of saw anew, you know, once I had kids, in, you know, this idea of like women's work and women's labor in the home. My experience talking to other parents has been mostly on the other side of the book. And yeah, I mean, I've definitely, like I said, received so many notes from women who are like, wow, I couldn't put a finger on like why that physicality was so complicated for me. You know, why a certain touch like triggered me, or you just brought up a memory, you know, of something that had never been resolved earlier in my life. And that's what I find so fascinating about like the alt-right response which is this like inability to entertain the idea that like women are complex beings with like memories, you know, with like a sense of physicality. And that when we become parents, all this stuff comes back up. And for me, like my experience was that all this stuff came up and then I was just so confused, you know, and I did a lot of sort of self-blaming and shaming, but also I kind of was confused about who was the kind of like perpetrator here, you know, and I think that's what contributes a lot to, you know, parents feeling like their children are, you know, are the ones to blame for the feelings that are coming up. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that actually we're having responses to other things.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, I think something Olivia and I talk a lot about when we talk about like access to, you know, maternal health and abortion rights and stuff like that, is that pregnancy is not a body neutral experience.
Not at all.
You don't get pregnant. It's not like with Barbie where she gets pregnant, you know, you put the little baby in her and then you pop the baby out and Barbie's body's normal. Like it changes your brain. It changes your hormones. It changes you inside physically. And I think about that. And then I think about, you know, I was watching Casey Davis the other day, Struggle Care, and she was talking about how even good guys like her husband, you know, you fall into that trap of primary parent, and one person knows how to do it and one person does know how to do it. And the physicality, because the baby has physically most often, very often come out of you, that you are somehow connected to it in a different way, which you are. And then the way that responsibility presents itself, right? And the way that it sort of, the blurred lines, and like you said, the stock image of the isolated, suburban mom and stuff like that, and how you sort of fall into that little hole. And I wonder, you mentioned that you had tried to do it differently, you had wanted to do it differently, and then suddenly you see yourself. And I think Olivia had the same experience. I don't have kids myself, but I watched my sister sort of be like, I'm going to do it different. And then suddenly you're not.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things that I write about in the book is like this idea of choice, which is so much more complicated than we allow it to be, right? Like, I'm going to choose to stay home, or I'm going to choose to go back to work, or I'm going to choose to parent this way or that way.
Right.
And the reality is that, agency and choice, especially in America, have always been conditioned, by class and race and gender. And so, we have this idea that we're going to like make all the right choices, but then we're always hemmed in by policy, by our particular, class or social status or cultural status, or, by racial violence, by, violence in our educational systems, I'm thinking about like who gets to feel, right now, like that their children are safe. These aren't just like choices that we can make. So I think it's important for us to like restore nuance to that conversation, because if not, we blame ourselves, and I think this comes up in the kind of gender divide. And, when we talk about like domestic inequality, my husband went back to work sooner for a variety of reasons having to do with a lack of paid leave, our particular economic status. And so it was like, sure, I'll stay home, with the baby a little bit longer. I was nursing. I was also reading like all this attachment theory, right? Which convinced me that I had to do certain things so that I wouldn't destroy my child forever.
Yeah.
And then those things have like a cascade effect.
Yep.
Right. So I think it's an issue that can be solved by noticing that we can't just like individual choice our way out of these problems.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something else that I saw recently that, speaks to the fact that like, I've always believed that feminism benefits everyone, right? And the idea that it somehow only benefits women is obviously goofy, but that to what you said about your husband, that like there is a lot of dads that would love to take longer parental leave or be around for PTA meetings or go on the field trips or be able to drop their kids at school every day. But because the patriarchy doesn't serve any of us, even though it seems like it serves some of us, it doesn't serve any of us. Like that's what, prevents them. And it can't be, Olivia and I, our dad was in private practice. He's a lawyer when we were kids, and he was around all the time. Yeah. But, it hasn't really made a difference over the last 30 years over, in the broader scale and on a macro level. Like it made a huge difference in our life, but one guy's not going to make a difference. Like you said, you can't personal choice yourself out of the patriarchy.
Totally.
And it's interesting. I'm just thinking about one of the things that you talk about in the book is the language of consent. And I talk about this a lot with my own kids, right? Because I'm raising 2 white boys, and I'm like, well, we need to talk about consent. And it's something as a feminist that was really important for me to learn to do with my children. We were not taught, our generation of women, right, how to talk about consent with our children, right? This was not something we were taught in school. But I can see, even just with each other as brothers or whatever it is, it's something we talk about almost every day, right? Just body and agency. And it's so interesting to put it in the perspective of motherhood, like you do, of like, do we give consent to all of these people, even though we birthed them, right, to touching us and being around us all of the time? And what does that mean So I would love if you could just talk a little bit about like that language of consent and motherhood and what, some of your findings were. Obviously, I highly, highly recommend everybody reads this book. Touched Out is amazing. And it is a must read for anybody thinking about having children, as well as anybody who has had children, because it's about so much more than motherhood, obviously. But that language of consent, where did that come from in terms of the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think it came from a couple places. One, I was, like I said, I became a mom right around the time of Me Too. And so I was kind of trying to reckon with how had I been taught about consent? How had I not been taught about consent, both by my parents, but also by the sort of broader cultural stories that I grew up with. So it was sort of, there's like, we age and we start to look back at these things and we realize like, oh my gosh, what happened back there was like really fucked up,
Yeah.
And to be processing that while you have children who you now also feel hopefully an obligation to, teach them about these things as well. It can be really tricky and really confusing. And, one of the things that I really wanted to do in the book, is not prescribe, some like, this is not like this is how you talk to your kids about this issue kind of book. I'm just not that kind of a writer. But also I think it's really important for us to acknowledge how tricky this territory is. And so I write about some of the ways that came up for me as a parent, trying to teach my daughter, to be strong and to, acknowledge her own autonomy while also feeling really powerless in my life. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is a lot of possibility there, because parenting sort of forces you, it's very confronting, right? So it like forces you to look at what's going on with yourself and your life. And you can't always just choose your way out of that powerlessness, but it can be this opportunity for learning alongside your children.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
And then, I mean, like practically, we talk about just how you're saying, Olivia, we talk about consent and bodily autonomy all the time.
All the time.
I mean, I think that's what parenting is, right? It's just this ongoing conversation.
Yeah. And how did going sober, where did that come from? Like deciding to become sober, and how did that journey intertwine with the book?
I think that I was realizing that for me, I mean, this was like around the time of like mommy wine culture and especially during the pandemic. I started to just look at, again, what kind of ideas was I subscribing to, and how did they actually reflect, my own values? And I saw myself, I write about this in the book a little bit, like using alcohol as a way to kind of numb out, but also like make myself into that stock image of the mom. Make myself deal with or acquiesce to like the really shitty conditions that I was parenting into, instead of, rebelling against them, or just feeling them and acknowledging them and being there in my body. And so for me, it was really about that like, I wanted to feel, I wanted to be present, not just for my children, but for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And what was it like birthing a book into the world? What was that process like?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still happening. It's been wild. When you're writing a book, I feel like you hate things about it. You also fall in love with it. Then it's done and there's like a million things that you would do differently. And I write about this a little bit in the book. It's kind of like kids, right? Like you have all these ideas of what's going to happen and how you're going to kind of make this perfect thing. And it's always like a little flawed creature. But bringing it into the world it's been wild. But it's been really powerful to just have conversations like these.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. So if somebody's going through a fresh start journey, whether maybe they're writing or they are deciding to pursue some of the work that you talk about in this book, with their own journey with their body and things. What would be some like recommendations you could give, especially to a new mom who picks up this book and is like totally baffled about the next steps after this?
Yes. I mean, I'm kind of like allergic to advice in general, but I think that for new parents, especially, listening to your body, whatever that means for you or whatever that requires for you is just so crucial, because that's something that we're not told, that when we become a parent, all this stuff is just going to come boiling to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
I wish this was like more part of postpartum, education and support. But also we live in this like really disembodied time, we're like always on screens and on our phones. And I think being in community and really noticing whatever is going on in your body and allowing yourself to set boundaries and knowing that you're not going to destroy your children.
Yeah.
But actually you're just going to model for them that you're like a complex, nuanced human being, and that they can be complex, nuanced human beings too, is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Especially we see a lot of women, in the divorce space and, choosing to, be brave and decide to go for, a divorce. And the hill that I will die on is that it doesn't ruin families. It actually makes them stronger. And, and so I think that plays into this so much too, with what you said, that it's okay to set boundaries. Like you're still a human, you're still a woman. And that's really important. And I really, like I said, I think if anybody is considering having children, to pick up this book, because it really digs deep into a lot of that stuff that we don't think about postpartum. And it's important to talk about that before we have the baby come out of us. So yeah. And then Amanda, what was something you ate recently and truly loved?
So I am currently, now that I'm back from my book tour, I'm working through, do you all know the Sweet Feminist?
No. Yes, I do. She has an Instagram.
She does. Yeah. Becca Rhea Tucker.
Yes.
So she has this great cookbook. It's called Baking by Feel.
Okay.
And so every recipe is like tied to a certain emotion.
Mm.
So you can just like open it and pick a feeling, and there's positive, feelings and, negative feelings. So I'm totally working through that, because I feel like putting a book into the world is like your feelings are all over the place. Plus, I think everyone is just feeling all over the place right now. So
yes.
It's great. I love baking. I feel like it's like complicated because it's so wrapped up in gender and domesticity. But for me, it helps me like get back in my body, as does eating really sweet, delicious.
Yeah.
Wait, what have you made from the cookbook that I should go out and get the cookbook and then make?
I made a pie recently that was like, I think it was it butterscotch, or what's the other one that's like a brown,
like a caramel or like a,
yeah, it was, I forget. I think maybe it was butterscotch. And then she has like a strawberry lemonade bundt cake. There's so much good stuff in there, though. There's like cookies and brownies, all good.
I'm a baker too. I love baking. It's like my self-care. Like, yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and she's great, and she's like really, pro-abortion rights and healthcare, and I love her and her delicious food.
Jenny, you've seen her stuff. She's the one that has the cakes that say like pro-abortion. Like you've done.
Oh, got it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I know her stuff.
Yeah. And then all of that. I mean, the baking too. It's it all goes back to just like being able to access joy as a woman, which we really, really don't like women to do in our society.
Completely, absolutely, yeah. It's just about accessing pleasure and joy. Yeah. Totally.
What's coming up next for you, Amanda? After you take a break from the book tour?
Oh my gosh, I hope just the break. I'm finishing up like teaching stuff. And yeah, I'm always at my newsletter, Mad Woman, which I'm kind of trying to, I have some new things for the new year that might be happening over there. And I have some other book projects that I'm working on. But yeah, hopefully just a lot of baking and eating.
Yeah.
And resting and snuggling with my kids.
Yeah, and you should be really proud. I mean, like the concept of touched out has become so talked about recently because of you and the book, and I think that you should just, that's all you and all that hard work, being shown in the ether. And it's important. It's really important because it validates for women that they're not crazy and that they really are feeling something, and that is a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think what's interesting about the concept is that it's really this sort of like amalgamation of all these feelings that women have. And so I think giving us more space and language to pull that apart rather than just saying like, oh, this is normal. This is like how you're going to feel. There's actually ways that we can talk about this and think about what's happening in our bodies. That's what I hope. That's where I hope the conversation's going.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you, Amanda, for being here. And for everybody that is listening, please go get Touched Out. Like I said, it's a must-have book. Amanda, where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram, not on Twitter, probably ever again, on Substack. My newsletter's Mad Woman, and in the Bay Area in real life.
And the book is everywhere. They can buy it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the places.
Yeah. All the places. Yep.
Amazing. Thank you for listening to today's story. We're always here, and we're so proud of you.
A Fresh Story is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the first and only platform for everything you need to begin again. You can read the show notes and learn more about today's episode at afreshstory.com.